In the land of sacred cows, is exploiting them a sacred violation? A new book by a PETA Sr.VP exposes India's cruelty to animals. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, we talk to Poorva Joshipura, a PETA Senior VP and former CEO of PETA India. In her new book, she exposes what happens in India. The book's title, For a Moment of Taste. Poorva was in London when we caught up with her, and she talks of her journey as an Indian American to her ancestral home to work for PETA, how she spread a non-religious message of ethical veganism, which has been popular, but it comes as the multinational corporations have discovered a marketplace for meat that is more than a little ironic. Between beef and dairy, Indians haven't begun to connect the dots about the nature of their consuming habits. But now, Joshipura's book gives Indians and those around the world who watch India a sense of the real price it's paid as meat consumption has doubled in just a decade. Here's my conversation with Poorva Joshipura, PETA Senior VP, on her new book, For a Moment of Taste, on the PETA Podcast. First of all, always good talking to you, Poorva. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
It's a cause for celebration, the new book, For a Moment of Taste, How What You Eat Impacts Animals, the Planet, and Your Health. HarperCollins has published your book, and I have to admit that the title was so intriguing, I thought, and so poetic, For a Moment of Taste. How did you come up with the title?
That's really what it boils down to, isn't it? I mean, if we're eating whatever we decide to eat, that moment, that taste lasts in your mouth for what, a few seconds? And when it comes to animals, and when it comes to the meat or the eggs or the dairy that we steal from them or that we kill them for, they go through an entire lifetime of suffering for just those few seconds. I think we owe it to the animals. I think it's necessary that we recognize all of what they have to go through from birth until death for that few seconds on your tongue, because that's the only way that we can make a fair judgment call as to whether that suffering is worth it. And really, no kind person would conclude that it is worth it.
I just have to tell you how much I was taken by the title, because it speaks to how we approach eating, how we approach what we decide to put in our bodies every day, and if we think at all. And I think that's probably the broader question. Do we think when we eat? Do we realize the choice that we're making and the impact of that choice? Whether we are vegan or non-vegan or vegetarian or flexitarian, or do we decide, well, I'll eat fish this time, or I'll eat, we're unthinking when we eat sometimes. And it's some urge, some other kind of, sensual urge to satisfy hunger, desire, all those things. And for what? I guess it is this moment of taste at the end.
Absolutely. And, today there's so much information out there that there's no debate about the fact that meat, egg, and dairy production is disastrous for the environment, that 1/3 of the world's, freshwater resources goes into producing these products, that half of the land in the world goes into producing these products, that as a result, we're bulldozing forests down and killing off wild animals, that eating these products causes us heart disease or diabetes, certain cancers. And so really, we're left without any excuses. People eat meat, eggs, and dairy because of the taste. And we don't even need it anymore for the taste. If you want that texture, if you want that creaminess, there's vegan foods out there available. that you can have. And so it really is just that. It's for the few seconds we are ruining the planet, we're ruining our health, and we're causing animals immense suffering. And so that's what this book is really about, is to make people more conscientious about what they're doing and the choices they're making every single day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
When you get to a stage where you're even beginning to think about the animals, I mean, I presume this book is really for the more general audience that maybe haven't gotten to that stage, but should. There's so much that happens when you produce, say, a ton of meat. It uses up 4 million gallons of water for just 1 ton of meat, which is an enormous amount of resources that get wasted. And of course, I'm just, your book really deals with India, and it's niched off in the publishing world. It's going to be available in India. Will it be available throughout the United States as well, or throughout the world?
Well, I hope so, because India is a major player on the global scale. They are the number one dairy producers. They're the number one beef producers, oftentimes, going kind of head to head with Brazil for that ranking. They are often the third or the fourth world egg producer. And so the reason why I've written this book is because, unlike in the West, where there are many books on what happens to animals, there's many documentaries, in India, there hasn't been really anything that gets into the nitty-gritty of what happens to these animals in India to produce this food. There's, of course, investigation videos that PETA puts out and things like that. But I really wanted to get into the detail of the matter to help people make more conscious choices, but also hopefully to influence policy. For example, one of the things that PETA is trying to push is for an end to cruel killing of baby chicks. Males in the egg industry, they're killed because they can't lay eggs, and the different chickens that are raised to have heavier bodies are used for meat. And in India, they're killed by way of drowning, burning, being crushed, being suffocated in an anything goes kind of manner. So just as one example of something we're trying to push is for an end to that type of cruel and haphazard and, quite frankly, illegal killing of baby chicks. So I'm also hoping that the book may have some influence on those types of efforts that PETA is making.
You mentioned how India is this global player. I don't think people really understand how big it is, but when you just consider the sheer population of India, if you're in the United States and you're, focused solely on the United States, well, without regarding India, let alone China, well, that's like most of the world right there. It's almost impossible to not be global in these matters if you really want to be effectively addressing the issue. And so your book is extremely important to people here in the United States.
Yes, and people don't realize that India has the world's largest population of cattle, for example, and so it is a major contributor of methane and other greenhouse gas emissions caused by the meat and dairy industries. And so what happens in India absolutely affects the world and the rest of the planet and the health of everybody.
We've talked about this before when we've had you on the podcast. It's this idea that, the term sacred cow comes to mind, and that the cows are sacred. But the cows aren't that sacred, are they, in India, if they have this beef production going on there?
Well, most people in India don't make the connection. There are people in India who eat beef, but the beef is often exported. But most people in India don't make the connection between the dairy they're consuming every day and the beef industry. The beef industry gets the animals it kills from the dairy industry. And, speaking of cows, when I first started out with PETA and working in India, the work I did was that of an investigator. And so I went to numerous slaughterhouses, followed numerous trucks carrying animals on their way to slaughter, and that sort of thing. And there was one calf I saw at a slaughterhouse in Calcutta. First of all, I had never been to a slaughterhouse before. You can smell the slaughterhouse before you get to the slaughterhouse. The smell itself is just so incredibly vile. But, in the slaughterhouse, there was this one calf who was fighting for his life. He was being pushed and pulled by the butchers to be put into the slaughter hall. He was fighting, he was bellowing, he was probably calling for his mother. And finally, he stumbled inside and they sawed at his throat with a dull knife. And as they did that, he looked at me. And I thought, I was crushed by the fact that he may think of me as someone who also wanted to harm him. And I was just so traumatized by what I saw that day that, when I went back to my hotel, I just sobbed and I told myself, I promised that calf that I'm going to work for the rest of my life so that I can prevent that type of thing from happening to more animals like him, hopefully. Can't save everybody. I wish I could. But that kind of personal experience of having been to slaughterhouses and having followed these trucks and meeting these animals, I had to tell people what I saw.
I would guess that they're almost as oblivious as Americans, maybe, when it comes to these issues. Or what was their reaction? Were they shocked, or were they put you off? What was their reaction?
I think people are absolutely shocked to make the connection when they finally realize it, because even though beef is not largely consumed in India, leather is used widely. Dairy is consumed widely, and people are now starting to connect the dots. You can't really say you're against beef if you're also consuming dairy, which is simply contributing to the supplier of the beef industry. And so people have been hoodwinked by the industries. They've been fooled. They haven't been given all the information. And hopefully, through this book and through videos that PETA puts out regularly, will open even more eyes.
Are the cows not sacred anymore, or do they feel like, well, we're modern? We're modernizing. This is what we do in the modern age.
I think cows are absolutely sacred. Many people hold that sentiment dear. They just haven't realized how they've been contributing to the butchery of those same cows that they hold dear. There has been in the past kind of an increase in meat eating, but thankfully, that trend is turning around. In the last study that was done, there were nearly 5% more vegetarians in 2014 than there were in 2004 that were above the age of 15. Much of the world, in fact, according to one statistic, 70% of the world is now either going vegetarian or taking meat off their plate. So I think that the awareness is growing. Add to that the existing religious and cultural sentiment that there is for cows. Hopefully, as more and more people connect the dots, we will start seeing, like we're seeing in other countries, a decline in dairy consumption. I'm sure that India will also start moving toward that trend.
But why do you suppose that is in India, where they just they haven't connected the dots?
It's largely because of the dairy industry itself not wanting people to connect the dots. They keep themselves very separate, at least as far as the public image is concerned, to the beef industry, when the reality is they are two sides of the same coin. And I think people also in the past, there weren't, before PETA came on the scene, nobody had gone to dairy farms to film. Nobody had gone to these slaughterhouses to make that connection for people. And so PETA has been going behind the walls of these farms, behind the walls of the slaughterhouses, and helping people make that connection. I think initially there's also been a disbelief almost that anyone in India would dare do this kind of stuff to cows. But they do. And the more people know about it, the more people object to it.
Is it just money, filthy lucre, or opportunity? Why do the people who are in charge, are they part of multinational corporations? Are they Indian corporations with Indian leaders and capitalists?
In India, like around the world, the entire system is moving away from small family-run kind of farms where, in the past, who knows, there may have been a cow and she may have been allowed to keep her baby. It's all moving away from that toward factory farming, just like there is in the West, just like there is around the world. Most chickens in India are already factory farmed. India is also a major player with regards to fish farming. Dairy production is moving toward factory farming. And then what happens, just like in the rest of the world, is that often there ends up being a few large corporations that are really the ones in charge. That's definitely happened in the poultry sector there. And then they have these contract workers that and contract farmers who don't always get the best deal at all, and often remain kind of living in poverty through that type of system. So that's it. That's the way it's moving. And really, the only way to stop a move toward intensive farming of animals and environmental disaster caused by meat, egg, and dairy production is just for people to not eat these products that come from these systems.
What do you think pushes the demand to eat meat?
There are the same types of influences in society there now that there are in the West. For example, there's the McDonald's or the KFC or the Burger Kings or the Pizza Huts and so on, normalizing meat, egg, and dairy consumption, putting huge amounts of advertising dollars, or advertising rupees, I should say, into promoting these kinds of products through advertisements and so on. So that's one factor of it, where these types of businesses and restaurants and so on not only influence the way people eat, they also influence how the animals are that they use are treated, just like in an assembly line kind of system, just as their burgers and so on are. The good news, however, is that just as there's now vegan burgers and, being sold at many KFCs and things like that in the West, these same businesses also offer a lot of vegetarian food in India. The more that they realize that there's a demand for vegetarian and vegan food, just as they are in the West, I imagine they will start responding by offering more and more of those options. But yes, globally, it does seem to be the trend that the more money people have, if they are meat eating, if they consume eggs, and if they consume dairy, they tend to consume more of it. And so within just a 10-year span, as per one account, per person, meat eating more than doubled in India. And so that's a trend that we absolutely do need to change. Simultaneous to there being more and more vegetarians and vegans, people who are consuming these products are eating more of it.
Yeah, it's funny because you were an American in India. Now you're in London, but when you were there, it would seem to me that, well, they're it's not perfect, but most of them were not meat eaters back when you first arrived. But now it seems like they're growing toward meat, being bigger meat eaters and bigger consumers of dairy. And how did that make you feel as an American vegan going down there? It must have been somewhat overwhelming to see that this place that you would think would have a more natural inclination toward being more humane and more vegan was now suddenly going in the opposite direction.
Well, I think India has had, and India's cultural reverence for animals, its religious reverence for animals has had a massive impact globally in influencing people to be vegetarian and vegan. And so it is a little bit of an irony for someone like me to return to India to kind of reshare those same values. And certainly when PETA first started in India in 2000, there was a trend, especially in young people, toward eating more meats and eggs and dairy foods and so on. Part of that had to do with the messaging at that time in favor of being vegetarian coming largely from a religious space. And so if youngsters agreed with it or not agreed with it, it was almost kind of a how religious are they sort of a decision. And not all Hindus are anyways vegetarian. That's kind of a myth. They refrain from eating beef and things like that. But PETA came in with a non-religious message, of course, in respect of the religions that have a pro-animal message, but coming in from an ethical space, saying that this is what happens to animals. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim, if you're Christian, if you're Jain, if you're Hindu. We want all of you to go vegan. And I think that was a helpful messaging because it's inclusive for everybody. It's a reminder that it doesn't matter what religion you are, you can still be vegan. No religion requires meat eating. No religion owns vegetarianism, And so we're starting to see more and more people, especially young people from all religious backgrounds in India, starting to go vegan.
The messaging is working, but also your investigations are really working. Describe a few more of the investigations that you found and the impact it's had on people when they see that this is going on in India.
The investigations are absolutely key because we can talk about it all day, but people only need to see a 10-second clip of this stuff and they know that it's wrong to do. And so PETA is the first to have ever done an investigation of the leather industry in India, letting people know for the very first time that cows and buffaloes are crammed into vehicles in such high numbers that their bones break, that they end up at the slaughterhouse with their throats slit, while they're fully conscious. PETA's the first ones to have done the dairy investigation in India, helping people for the first time understand that the male calves are considered worthless by the dairy industry since they can't produce milk, and so are either left to starve or abandoned or sent to slaughter, that all of these animals, or most of them, end up as beef. PETA is the first to have done investigations into the egg industry there, helping people see for the first time what a battery cage even is. I mean, that wasn't common knowledge in India. And helping them see what happens to the male chicks in that industry. All of the work that PETA has done, that goes out in video form, has helped form, the basis of what's there in my book. In my book, the only difference I would say is that it's in much greater detail as to, what you see in those videos what it actually means for the animals in terms of their health, in terms of their, psychological well-being, in terms of their physical well-being. It's described in much, much, much greater detail than what a video can provide.
Does it approach how bad it is in the United States? Is it similar?
In the United States, 99% of the animals are factory farmed. In India, it's not yet that high, but they're getting there. People sadly look to what happens in America and copy that. And so that's what's happening in India too, with the intensification of the farming of and the rearing of these animals. And that was the other thing, in India, oftentimes you speak to people, and it's a common thing. People say this in the States too, that animals aren't really killed for dairy. Animals aren't really killed for eggs. Neither of those things is actually true. But through the book, I wanted people to understand that the death is just one part of it. Their entire life is full of having their bodies manipulated so that they are, for example, with chickens, top heavy, so top heavy that their bones break or they have heart attacks if they live too long, or that they're mutilated, like chickens used for eggs have their beaks seared off instead of them being given more space since they fight in the cage. That they're severely confined. Again, chickens used for eggs, they can't even hardly move. They can't even stretch their wing. They need to move around and explore and use their minds and their bodies just as much as we do. And so all of these things, it's a lifetime of suffering. It's not just the death. The death is the very end, but every single day of their life has been horrific, and we need to know what happens to them and during their lifetimes and care about it. And so I wanted to highlight all of what happens from birth all the way to death, because especially with the increase in factory farming, the question isn't so much about how they die, it's how they live.
Just a final question about the consequences. If something is not done, we know about the warnings about what it means to the earth, the global consequences, what it means to personal health. What are the consequences all the same in India as they are in the United States?
Well, India is unfortunately going to be, or at least as per the advice of climate scientists, going to be one of the countries that's most worst affected by climate change. We're already seeing in India severe droughts, flooding, extreme weather, farmer suicides as a result, and things like that. India is also the world leader in things like heart disease, diabetes, stroke, certain cancers. And so all of the consequences of all of these things are very, very real for India and Indians. Climate change is not just a Western problem. It's very much a problem that India needs to also recognize its responsibility for and deal with for the sake of its own citizens and animals as well.
What was it like for you to finish the book and now to go out there and tell people about it? Do you feel that the message is more important than ever, especially now that we see, the consequences growing, the more that we don't stop the trend or the direction toward meat eating and factory farming?
Yeah, I mean, I just saw that there was a missing resource in India, that this information wasn't there for people in one place, to kind of access and to really go through and understand. And so I hope that this book provides that missing resource. And I hope that it turns, it gets many more people thinking about what happens to these animals, what's happening to the planet, and empowering them to take charge of their own health by eating healthy plant foods instead of animals.
Now, you've been at this for a while. When I first met you years ago, you were just about to embark on your tour of duty in India for PETA. You're now with the PETA Foundation in London. How does this book change or strengthen your motivation to work for the animals?
I think that with everything that anyone does to help animals, there's just never enough, There's more than 77 billion animals, land animals alone, that are killed every year for meat and animal-derived foods. And when you add fish, there's trillions of fish. So my work, this is just a drop in the ocean. My work is by no means done. There's so much more work to do. So I'm always aware of that. And working at PETA, we see a lot of progress. Things have really changed. Eating vegan is just has been put on the map. It's skyrocketing interest in vegan foods around the world. But we have to do more. We have to do more if we want to protect ourselves from where the planet is going. And of course, there's still the lives of literally trillions of animals every year at stake.
To go back to the title, For a Moment of Taste, and to get people to be more conscious about what they put in their bodies and how they eat and what they eat. You've just listed off how there's so much more to do. It's almost seems insurmountable at times, but it really does go back down to that one person making the right choice or the right decision at a meal can make all the difference. And as much as there are all these tremendous, these statistics that we must try to conquer, try to reverse, the decision that one makes at a meal can be that first step toward changing it all, right?
Oh, absolutely. Anyone who says, well, what difference will it make, if I go vegan? Every vegan is estimated to save the lives of about 200 animals a year. 200 animals a year. You're saving these animals simply by not eating them and by not eating products stolen from their bodies. That's a tremendous difference each one of us can make easily. Every single time we sit down to eat, we can just simply choose to be kind. That's it.
Yeah, and I've heard statistics that say that just by cutting your meat consumption in half, that's 30% of savings in terms of global warming, CO2, and all the things in the environment that meat eating contributes to the broader issue, the broader problem. But if you go vegan, you go from 30% to 60%. Just one person can have that kind of impact. So a meal is a good start.
Oh, absolutely. We are not helpless in this situation. We're not just victims of what's happening to the planet. We have the power to make a huge difference, starting with making changes to what we eat. We don't have to blame fate and that sort of thing for our heart disease and genetics and things that may play a role, but your diet is really the real culprit to those things. We can be in charge of our own health. We don't have to contribute to animal suffering. So it is a very powerful tool. Your fork is a very powerful tool.
Poorva Joshipura, For a Moment of Taste is her new book. Poorva, thank you for joining us here on the PETA Podcast.
Thank you.
Poorva Joshipura, PETA Senior VP with the PETA Foundation, She spoke with us from London on her new book, For a Moment of Taste. Go to PETA.org for more information. And that's our program. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can also find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or on aldef.org/blog, that's AALDEF.org/blog, or at my own personal website, amok.com. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.